The coronavirus did major damage in Europe during the month of March this year, and while many countries recovered, they were hit by a second wave, and cases have surged, inducing lockdowns or more restrictions enforced in most European countries. This map from the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control shows the 14-day notification rate and positive test rate for the EU, EEA, and the UK, updated on October 16th. As you can see, many EU countries have a higher than or equal to 150 cases per 100,000 individuals that were in the positive test range. Currently, there have been 203,000 deaths and 5 million total cases in the EU and the UK. For a while, many countries in the EU accomplished flattening the curve in the summer months, but as you can see in this graph, there was a surge in case numbers in September, and they have now reached 134,000 new cases in Europe as of October 19th. Enforcing rules and regulations was an issue from the beginning for many European countries, and in order to emphasize the importance of keeping yourself and people around you safe, many implemented fines and potential jail time to incentivize following the rules. These regulations are in regard to requiring one to wear a mask, bars and restaurants closing early, inciting curfews, or leaving your county, state, city, etc. This led to mass confusion in countries like Italy and Belgium, in which people did not know what they were going to be fined for because the rules were so new and varied per city or region of that particular country. By the end of the first wave of the pandemic, many countries were left with thousands and thousands of fines given out and a large proportion of them not paid. An example of a European country that is using fines and jail time to incentivize their citizens to follow their coronavirus rules and regulations put in place is Germany. Currently, Germany has about 386,000 total cases and is currently at 7,595 new cases.
Starting in April, the German government required all citizens to wear face masks when in public. This requirement pertains to those who are shopping or use public transport. It is not, however, advised that people buy medical-grade masks, as the government stresses that these are needed for medical personnel. Special exceptions are, however, being made for those with medical conditions that preclude them from wearing masks. Those with these medical exemptions should have a note from their doctor on hand. As for quarantine, all those seeking entry into Germany are required to adhere to a strict 14-day quarantine. Some may avoid this quarantine, however, if they are in possession of a doctor's certificate that proves they have no COVID symptoms. These certificates may be no more than 48 hours old, and as with other nations, Germany also requires its citizens to quarantine for 14 days following a positive COVID test or exposure to the virus. Those traveling within German borders who show no signs of COVID may do so freely. For curfew, curfews have been implemented in virus hotspots such as Berlin and Frankfurt. Shops are required to close between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m., with exceptions made for pharmacies and gas stations only. Stores found to be in violation of the curfew are subject to fines of up to 5,000 euros. This curfew is set to be lifted at the earliest on October 31st. Social distancing guidelines, as with other countries, German officials have implemented very strict social distancing guidelines. 1.5 meters is the minimum distance designated by the German government. As for social gatherings, up to 10 people from 2 different households are allowed to gather, though it is advised that this be in an outdoor space and social distancing guidelines be observed. Individuals who host gatherings should also keep a list of those who are in attendance. Finally, travel through Germany is only permitted if individuals either remain in Germany no longer than necessary, or if the individual in question can present documentation issued by necessary authorities in the destination country. And finally, in order to enforce mask ordinances and curfews, state police are permitted to fine individuals or businesses found to be in violation of these provisions. There is no nationally agreed upon amount for fines. Amounts differ between states and range from a minimum of 200 to 25,000 euros. In extreme cases, prison sentences of up to 2 years may be given.
The Netherlands began lockdown on March 15th as restaurants, cafes, sports clubs, and other entertainment venues were ordered to close per government instruction. The Netherlands government announced that COVID-19 is a type A disease, which constitutes the strictest containment policies for the health of the people. All of these restrictions are enforced by the Dutch police through fines and arrests. For example, the fine for not wearing a mask in public is 95 euros. From the start of COVID-19, from the COVID-19 pandemic to now, more than 15,000 fines have been issued across the country for COVID-19 restriction violations. Most of these were issued upon failure to maintain a 1.5 meter distance between people and or meeting in groups larger than 3 during lockdown measures. A statement released on March 23rd announced that companies which failed to provide a 1.5 meter distance between coworkers could be fined up to 4,000 euros. And people that did not comply could be fined up to 400 euros. Rotterdam has issued the greatest number of fines, which with 1,400 reported just between March 23rd and June 28th. In comparison, only 835 fines were issued in Amsterdam and 923 in The Hague. However, fines issued per 10,000 people proved to be much higher in Nijmegen. Though only 578 fines were issued in Nijmegen between March 23rd and June 28th, this is the ratio of 32.5 fines per 10,000 people. Rotterdam only issued 21.5 fines per 10,000 people.
The UK is another example of this. They divided up their enforcement between their 4 countries, meaning they had to make rules and regulations for each and leave it up to those countries to be able to use local enforcement to regulate these new rules. This did cause some uproar and some resistance as well towards these new regulations.
England, masks required in all places, including restaurants, except when you're eating, of course. There are different rules on gatherings, 2 meters distance minimum, masks always on in public, no large groups in public, and masks are enforced by police. Breaking these rules can result in a minimum fine of £200. For each breach of this rule, there's a doubling price that leads to a maximum of £6,400. Businesses not enforcing distancing and group size limits can face a £10,000 fine. And any individual hosting more than 30 people could face a fine of up to £10,000. Businesses and employers must implement methods of decreasing risk for employees. Failure to do so is considered a criminal offense, resulting in fines up to £10,000 or imprisonment up to 2 years. Businesses can also face temporary closures along with the fines. So Scotland just entered a new lockdown on October 9th, and it's going to last until October 26th, so next Monday. Pubs and restaurants are closed for the next 2 weeks in the Central Belt, which is the horizontal line that has Glasgow, Edinburgh, and Ayrshire. Hospitality businesses outside the Central Belt can only be open from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. There's no alcohol served inside in any venue. It can only be served outside seating areas where distances are enforced. Meetings between 2 non-family households have been banned for the next couple of weeks, and only 6 people of different households can meet in public. Working from home is strongly encouraged nationwide, although it's not really enforced anywhere. And these rules are enforced by fines and closures, but the way they're enforced is left to the discretion of local authorities. For Wales, ordinances are enforced by local health officials and Welsh police. They can enforce penalties including fines, closures, and recommend prosecution in court. Local officials can post a premise improvement notice for a business to change how it operates in light of mandates. And they have a limited amount of time in which to do that. And if they don't, that can result in temporary closures and fines. Most breaches carry a fine of £60. Subsequent offenses will double the fine each time to a maximum of £1,920. But if you go to court under a prosecution, the court has no fine enforcement ceiling, so they can hit you with a fine of whatever they deem necessary. Hosting an unlicensed event with more than 30 people can result in imprisonment and a fine up to £10,000. For Northern Ireland, there are new regulations taking place on the 16th, so this past Friday, and will last for 4 weeks. Maximum of 10 people from 2 households, 11 p.m. closing times for all businesses, and close contact businesses cannot open. No events other than outside sporting events with more than 15 people. No business can serve alcohol after 8 p.m. 2-meter distancing minimum and face masks required at all times. These are enforced with fines, temporary closures, in some cases incarceration, which again is up to the discretion of local authorities. This is because the UK has seen a massive jump in cases from the end of September to now. They have 689,257 confirmed cases as of this past Saturday. The United Kingdom has 43,293 deaths from COVID, giving it a fatality rate of 6.3%. And the United Kingdom's population is 66.65 million people, which means COVID has a 1.03% infectivity rate.
Although having nationally mandated laws in place was important, in order to enforce the rules, many countries left it up to local officials. For example, in Belgium,
on April 1st, Minister of Home Affairs Peter de Crème set up a police task force to ensure uniformity in COVID-19 restrictions enforcement. This was prompted after the Department of the Interior's Crisis Center received thousands of questions from citizens questioning what was and was not allowed. De Crème commented in an online statement that both our police force and our citizens need clarity. Something is either allowed or forbidden. From this point, local police were responsible for carrying out permanent checks to ensure COVID-19 regulation compliance and issue fines for those that are unwilling to comply. The original fines could be as high as €250 for those that did not comply to the coronavirus lockdown measures. From mid-March to April 17th, over 60,000 violations of lockdowns were reported. By September 17th, over 30,000 people had not paid their fines from COVID-19 restrictions. The Belgian government proposed a solution to this by adding unpaid fines to individual tax reports for citizens to pay when taxes are due. Those that do not pay the fines in their taxes will be confronted by the Belgian tax authorities. Federal Justice Minister Cohen Greens reported that by September 17th, the total fines issued by the Belgian police amounts to around €6 million.
In Italy, local officials will get the power to close public areas after 9 p.m. Bars and restaurants will close at midnight, along with restrictions on outdoor dining and number of people in a group. All large group gatherings are suspended, and leisurely places like gyms and swimming pools must adapt to new safety protocols. Masks are now mandatory to wear outside, and if you are not wearing one, fines can range from €400 to €1,000. There is still no curfew, but during the lockdown in March, if someone left the house without a designated permission slip to do so and were caught, they could be fined up to €80. Also during this time, almost 50,000 people a week were being fined for not respecting restrictions, mostly not wearing a mask. There were new laws being announced constantly, which led to mass confusion, especially because the rules were different per each region. Mostly, though, fear of embarrassment contributed to most citizens obliging to the rules. There is a mandatory isolation period of 10 days for anyone who tests positive but is asymptomatic, and before you leave isolation, you must show proof to local authorities of a negative test result. Breaking quarantine, whether you are a citizen in Italy or a traveler in Italy, carries a maximum penalty of 18 months in prison and a fine of €5,000. Forced to implement new restrictions, Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte announced on October 18th that the government will do everything they can to avoid a lockdown like the one in March, but that every citizen must be willing to follow these restrictions. Most European countries we observed require a 2-week quarantine upon entering their country, and some will allow only EU countries to enter, but others won't even allow that because of the recent surge in case numbers. There are also limits put into travel nationally. Countries like Ireland and Spain do not allow for much intercity or state travel without an essential purpose. Austria is also among this list that is limiting most non-European Union countries as well as many of the EU countries.
So the Spanish government has issued a nationwide restriction limiting public gatherings to 6 people at most outside. And sitting at bars and restaurants outside is also limited to 6 people. In Madrid, people are not allowed to go outside unless it is for an essential purpose. They are not allowing different households to meet up beyond 4 or 5 people. It depends on the district. The Spanish government has kind of left some things up to the discretion of local district governments. But nationwide, the punishments in extreme cases include imprisonment for a limited time. But more likely, they just impose fines that range anywhere between 600 to 60,000 euros. And this is because Spain has seen another jump in case numbers. They have 936,560 confirmed cases as of Friday. They also have 33,553 deaths, which means the fatality rate in Spain is 3.6%. And since Spain has a population of 46.94 million, their COVID-19 there has an infectivity rate of 2%. And you can see here on this chart just the jump that it has taken from the beginning of August to October. And that's because around the beginning of August, they kind of relaxed their restrictions and their closures a little bit. And so you see that's the result of that. And they're debating reinstating some of those more extreme closures to kind of stop the spread again.
Overall, we learned that Europe seems to be learning from their mistakes from the first wave of the coronavirus in terms of being more clear when implementing fines, because those are necessary in enforcing the rules, being strict on borders reopening, as well as masks being mandated indoors and outdoors, and limiting large gatherings, even if that means not being able to leave one's house. We saw a pattern in deferring to local law enforcement as a way to survey people and make sure they are safe, as well as being able to adapt the rules to different regions of that country. After seeing this mass surge in case numbers, most leaders of European countries are learning they must be intentional with their new rules so as to avoid the disaster we saw in the spring.